Okay, so apologies, I don't have my headphones today, but I need to make this video. This video is on peer feedback and how to give it. I usually assign my classes a series of articles connected to peer feedback and its importance and its meaning and its effectiveness. Articles like Asao Inoue's community-based assessment is a kind of overarching the importance of peer feedback and also kind of community grading. I also assign To Give is Better Than to Receive from, I think, Wade Ju 2001. No, that's a different one. To Give is Better Than to Receive is, I think, a 2009 piece. Wade Ju has another one that's interaction and feedback in mixed peer groups, talks about some of the sociocultural dynamics of giving feedbacks, where sometimes we make assumptions based on people's outward appearance or social background or linguistic background, and it changes the way we give them feedback and they give us feedback. So that's something to be careful of. But those are some assignments I usually encourage. Some readings I usually encourage when it comes to peer feedback. The important thing with peer feedback is that we don't want to be jerks, but we want to be helpful. So we don't want to borrow from Mark Driscoll, we want to build people up, not beat people up. So when it comes to feedback, there are all kinds of places we get to give feedback, so it's actually a really important genre to practice in the academic setting and kind of thinking through how you do that. It is a key type of communication we have. We give peer feedback in a variety of contexts. Where are some places that you give feedback? Think about it for a minute. Okay, it could be at your workplace, right? So how many of you guys do performance reviews or have received performance reviews? They can be awkward. They can be challenging. If you ever had to give one, it's not always a fun experience. It takes work and careful communication. We also give feedback on a daily basis, or ask for feedback if we cook. Sometimes we'll ask people, is my hair all right? I ask my wife, should I shave today? That kind of stuff. Does this vest make me look fat? Those sorts of things are common things. So we get feedback and give feedback constantly. And so as we think about feedback, I have a specific model for feedback that I call a rice paragraph. It builds on kind of the same components we learn about with pies or axes and those sorts of things when we're dealing with where do we put claims, where do we put reporting statements or statements of fact, where do we put explanation, and that sort of thing, like how do we structure something like that. So when we give feedback, it's a specific genre of communication that if we practice it, we can find ways to tie in. I will say that my rice paragraph model is built on a Rogerian rhetorical practice. And so we'll talk about that later when we get into rhetorical patterns, genres, metastructures later in the course, or macro structures. But those are things to be aware of. Like those are some of the influences of what I'm going to talk to you about. If we use a traditional version, if we try and use a traditional paragraph model like pies or axes, the first thing we do is we often start with a topic sentence or a claim. So if we tried to use that model for giving feedback, a lot of times we'll just right out the gate, this needs to be fixed, or this is, we'll state our claim really quickly, and then we may provide support, and then we may provide explanation, but depending on how sensitive that subject is for someone, whatever the subject is that we're giving feedback on, and people's writing is kind of a sensitive thing because they often tie who they are or their identity to it, and many people already have a little bit. We talked about the PTS of writing. They've already got a little bit of hurt connected to what their writing is. And so we want to make sure that we're not starting off just with you need to fix this, or this is terrible. We don't want to use language like terrible because it's not meaningful, or even awesome or good. Those aren't really meaningful types of words, whether we're giving constructive or critical feedback. We want to give feedbacks that's specific, tangible, and offers recommendations. So if you think about the type of feedback that wasn't helpful for you in the past, don't give that kind of feedback. If it seemed like someone was only kind of harping on the things you need to fix, or little mistakes that it's like, yeah, I know I shouldn't have done that. I kind of missed it. Like, that's not the kind of stuff we want to spend time on. But if we use that traditional model of pies, that's not a good idea, because we start with our claim, and in some cases that doesn't, when it's a sensitive topic that alienates our reader, and they don't hear the reason why that might be a good thing or an effective thing to focus on, or a meaningful thing for them to focus on or shift. And so what we want to do instead is, I use the rice model instead of the pies model. So instead of starting with a claim, start with relationship and rapport building. That means my first sentence, some people will use models similar to the rice paragraph, like the compliment sandwich or something like that. But start by at least mentally acknowledging that there's a person on the other side of the writing that you are creating, of the feedback that you're giving. How do you imagine them responding to it? Start with something that helps show connection to them as human beings, and that you are not a robot saying, fix this, right? That's weird. Anyways, so we want to connect with our audience, connect with our readers who we're trying to give feedback to based on their writing. Rapport building and relationship establishing is step one. That's the R for rice. After that, then provide the information or the illustration or the tangible concrete detail from their writing or the pattern that you noticed from their writing that you feel like you want to address. Whether that's addressing it as like, wow, when you did this, this, and this, that was really effective. It made me think of this thing, or it helped me understand that so much better, or it helped me visualize, whatever the case is. And remember, you've got all 8 aspects of writing to choose from. So there's a lot of variety. So you want to point to that specific moment in the text, call it out. In paragraph 2, sentence 3, when you said this, and you insert a short quote, to get them to say, oh, they're talking about in that one specific moment in my text, kind of thing. Then after you establish a relationship, provide information, then rice, R-I-C, the C is claim. And that's where you actually say whether you think that was effective or ineffective, to what degree, and why. And that's where we get into explanation. And you can also make explanation and recommendation at that point. So we start establishing relationship, R. We provide information or illustration, concrete, specific, tangible things from that person's writing. And then we say what we see, or as part of that, we say what we're seeing, and then we provide a claim saying this is how we're interpreting that. Is it effective? Is it ineffective? Why not? And to what degree? And explain that out, and then provide recommendations. So that's a rice paragraph of feedback. So again, when we give feedback, it's not just glossing over things that could be changed or developed further, but so many times when people go to give feedback, we've been trained to give negative feedback by experience. I see students all the time take on the teacher or instructor voice that they've had in the past. Don Skrocheski talks about this as the kind of ghosts of our composition past, where we have, when we're in the classroom, we almost have these other people talking who aren't there, which is kind of interesting and weird and creepy. But when we go to give feedback, then we'll often embody those voices. And whether it's a writing teacher or someone else in your life that is really good at negative feedback that just beats people down, make sure you don't borrow their voice. Instead, build people up. Don't beat them up. Finally, when it comes to giving feedback in my class, I see a lot of, in general, students, especially college students, and people in general, tend to default to grammar feedback. We've talked about this, especially in this first unit, and you really shouldn't be spending a lot of time on it at this point. We're not looking for someone who can find every single grammar rule broken based on a particular sociocultural norm. Remember, our goal was, how can we make meaningful communication with another person, with our readers? How do we make it meaningful? So if you see a pattern that you want to emphasize, you may do that, but I do not want, for my class, I don't want you giving a substantial amount of time on the feedback portion to the linguistic aspect of writing. In fact, for this first project, if you're watching this for my summer course, I'd say no, not at all. You have 7 other aspects of writing: structural, analytical, rhetorical, sociocultural, scientific, technological, all of those fun things, right? So we've got all these other aspects of writing we can give feedback on. We want to look for the patterns. Here's another thing: look for the patterns that we want to focus on, not the individual things. You know, if we see a pattern of someone putting their claim at the end of a paragraph instead of the beginning, and that leaves us going into the paragraph getting a little confused, well, that's a structural thing that you can talk about. If we see someone nailing transitional phrases constantly, we want to praise them for that so they know to do more of it in the future. If someone had a really interesting or engaging hook or title, and it wasn't just Project One, we want to praise them for that. We want them to keep it interesting for us. So focus on the patterns of things people are doing well or seem to be struggling with, and avoid hyper focusing on grammar, because people default to that when they don't want to do the work. And the problem is that often people try and critique grammar. They take on a massive it ends up feeling like, here's all the things you did wrong. I know some instructors even do this, where they take a point off for every grammar mistake. I'm not really a fan of that. I think it reinforces a bad practice, a practice that actually harms writers and keeps them from understanding what meaningful writing really is, and distracts from the most important things. There are places to focus on that, but not now. Not just yet. And usually not in the intensity that most people want to. So don't default to that. Use the rice paragraph. Build people up, don't beat them up. And look for the patterns to give more substantial feedback on. Yep, that's all I got. I'm not going to go into all the different ways we do grading. I might have to do that in another video.